Hi everyone, welcome to the Wapsie River Center. My name is Becky Ball. I am a naturalist out here. We are located in Dixon, Iowa, and we're part of the Scott County Conservation Board. So today I am giving you a presentation on monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies are very iconic. They're one of the larger butterflies, are easily recognizable. They are bright orange, so they're hard to miss. And unfortunately with monarch butterflies, their population is decreasing. So during this presentation, you're going to learn about their natural history and their life cycle, along with a couple citizen science projects that you can get involved with in your very own backyard to help with data collection on the monarch butterflies, and hopefully in turn, you'll get results from that, and we will see how we can increase that population once again. So here is the presentation. So with this presentation, you are going to learn about citizen science. So what is citizen science? Citizen science is research conducted by public volunteers. So a scientist will come up with a project that they really want to study. And of course, one scientist can't be everywhere at the same time. And if they want a large data pool or a large collection of data, they need to get the public involved. So a lot of citizen science projects are volunteers anywhere ages from children all the way to grandparents. It doesn't really matter your age level. It also doesn't matter your skill levels of data collection. So there are different projects that if you have different interests, whether it is monarch butterflies like you're going to learn about today, or if you have interest in other plants, different animals, weather, space science, soil science, there are projects out there for all of those topics. So with today, we are going to be learning, the two citizen science projects we'll be learning about today is Monarch Health and Monarch Watch. And I'll get a little into more detail with those a little further in this presentation, but we will be talking about monarch butterflies. So the monarch butterfly, they are amongst the most colorful and striking butterflies. They are one of the most iconic butterflies. I remember them growing up, and we're still seeing them today, thank goodness. So they are slightly toxic to their predators, and that is due to the milkweed that they eat. And this is the only plant that they eat, from itty-bitty caterpillars all the way until they are full-grown caterpillars, and then they will start nectaring off of other flowers when they are adult butterflies. But one type of plant is all they eat when they are munching away as little caterpillars. And that milk inside the milkweed is slightly toxic, so it makes them as a whole slightly toxic to their predators. Now, there are other butterflies out there, like for instance, the viceroy. It looks very similar to the monarch butterfly, but it does not eat milkweed, and therefore it is not toxic. But because it looks so similar to the monarch butterfly, predators don't eat it because they think it's a monarch and they think it is toxic. Now, caterpillars, a large caterpillar, not the itty bitty babies, but the large caterpillars, they are capable of eating an entire milkweed leaf in less than 5 minutes. And milkweed leaves can get pretty big, so that is pretty impressive. Now, when they are babies, from when they are eggs all the way until when they are an adult butterfly, they can live upwards of 6 to 9 weeks. With that being said, they are typically in the egg form for 1 to 3 days. Then they are in the caterpillar form for 10 to 14 days. And then they're in the chrysalis form for another 10 to 14 days. And then when they finally hatch and become a beautiful adult butterfly, they are typically a butterfly for 2 to 5 weeks. However, if they are the generation that is migrating south to Mexico, they can live upwards of 8 to 9 months. And that is because even around here in Iowa, they don't start their migration until about mid-September. So we're about there. Right now, they're starting to migrate down. So when they migrate down, they usually don't reach Mexico until about November. And they're down there until about late February, in which they'll start their migration back north. So that takes up a solid 4 months right there, if not 5 months. And then they still have the time of flying down there, flying back up. So they are typically alive for 8 to 9 months. So within this time span, within those 10 to 14 days of them being a caterpillar, from when they're itty bitty all the way until they're the giant caterpillar form, they grow 2,700 times their original weight from when they hatch from an egg. So to put that into perspective, an infant baby human would basically grow to the size of an adult elephant in 10 to 14 days. So that is about 2,700 times the original weight of a baby. In 10 to 14 days will be an adult elephant. So that is really, really interesting on how fast they can grow in just a very short amount of time. And it's because all they do is eat. So the monarch butterfly, they shed their skin four times of their 5 molts. So you may hear me refer to them as instars. First instar, second instar, all the way up to 5th instar. And when they shed their skin, they typically eat their skin to leave no trace for predators. And I know that sounds gross, but they don't want the predators finding them with their skin laying around. And also their skin does contain nutrients for themselves. And when the 5th molt, when they molt out of that skin, they actually molt into the pupa, or into the chrysalis is another word for it. Then in the fall, they can migrate up to 3,000 miles. Now from here in Iowa, if they flew up north and this is where they stayed, this is the highest they went in latitude, it's not quite 3,000 miles down to Mexico, but there are butterflies that make it all the way to the southern border of Canada. Those are the ones that will travel up to 3,000 miles, which is further than any other insect migration. And as you can see in the bottom pictures, it is easy to tell if a monarch is a male or a female. So the picture on the left is our male, and you can see there are 2 dots on the vein that is closest to the body of the male, and those 2 dots tell me that this is a male butterfly. On the female, you can see her veins are a little thicker than the male's, and there is no dot on that inner vein closest to her body. So that tells me that is the female. Dots mean male, no dots mean female. So here are your instar stages. We have in the top left picture, you have the monarch eggs. And you can see my thumb is in that picture. So you can see really how tiny these eggs are. They are about the tip of a pencil. So they're really, really tiny eggs. They're usually a white or cream color. You can see the other egg that I have the arrow pointing to is a darker gray color. And that means that egg is just about ready to hatch, or it's already in the process of hatching. Then the next picture over to the right is a first instar. So it hatched. It hasn't shed any skin. It just hatched out of the egg, and here it is. And it looks like a grain of rice with a black head. Then once it sheds its skin again, that's when the stripes start to form in the second instar stage. But if you notice in the second instar stage, you cannot see any antenna on the rear or the head. And again, there is my thumb for reference of size. These guys are tiny. Finally, in the third instar stage is when you start to see little antennae forming. Again, they're going to be small. They still have their stripes. Third and fourth instar are sometimes really hard to tell apart, just because they can be small. A fourth instar may be big, it may be small. You really can't tell. The easiest way to tell is their antenna length. So as you can see with second instar, they really have no antennas that you can really see. Third instar, you can see it, and typically the rear antennas are about the same length as the head antennas of the previous instar. So when you hit the fourth instar, they still have long antenna on the front. They have little nubbins on the back. And then finally, the fifth instar, they're really big, and their front antennas tend to get droopy. So that's when you can really tell if it is a fifth instar, which means it is going to form the chrysalis next. So once it is done munching away on leaves, it goes to the top of something, or maybe the underside of a leaf, and they find a way kind of out of the way of wind because they don't want to get knocked down if a storm comes through when they're in the chrysalis, and they form this J formation. And then they're in that position for a few hours before they form the chrysalis, at which point they shed their last skin and they form into this green chrysalis. So you can see the second from the right, it is a different color green, and then the one on the bottom right is that light, almost light green color. So you can see the difference. He is almost formed in the second to the right, and then he is fully formed in that last picture, and that is their chrysalis stage. So there are many threats to monarch butterflies. Some of them are natural threats. Some of them are not. Some of them are threats of us. So with them, fewer than 1 out of every 10 eggs laid by a female monarch will survive to become an adult. And I see that statistic and I think, wow, how do any butterflies survive? But one female monarch butterfly can lay anywhere from 100 to 300 eggs in her lifetime. So that's a lot of eggs. And only 1 out of every 10 will survive. So we can have anywhere from 10 to 30 surviving, which is still a lot of butterflies. Now, some of their threats include pesticides, habitat destruction, and parasites. Parasites are the more natural predator for these guys, or the natural threat for these guys. But the other two are kind of caused by us. So pesticides is one. Milkweed is, because it has weed in the name, some people think it is an actual weed, even though it has a beautiful flower. It smells really good. But this milkweed is sometimes sprayed by pesticides or herbicides, which then makes the plant sick, and then the butterfly or the caterpillars that are eating it will then become sick themselves. Habitat destruction is another one, and that's not only where they overwinter down in Mexico, but it is also up here in the Midwest where they are feeding. It is also over in California. They have monarchs out there, and there's a lot of urban development going on the coastline, and that is where the monarchs overwinter in California. So that is a problem over there. Agricultural expansion, a lot of that is because if we have a lot of bean fields and corn fields, those are not pollinated by butterflies, and they need that food. They need the nectar from the flowers to continue in their migration. So as long as we can plant a lot of flower beds as well so they can get the nectar to build their energy to fly down to Mexico, then that will really help them out. And again, destruction of the host plant, which is milkweed. That is another one of their threats. So the Oyamel Fir Tree, that is the tree that is where they overwinter in Mexico. There's a forest of these Oyamel fir trees down in Mexico, and they are a fir tree, so they're more dense, and the butterflies will cluster in them. So you can see the big picture in the middle. It almost looks brown, like that tree may be dying, but it is not. That is a living tree, and that orange or that rust color is actually thousands of monarchs on that tree, and that is where they cluster together so they can overwinter down in Mexico. And the picture on the bottom right is a picture of them all clustering together. And then the picture in the upper right shows just a monarch butterfly. So these guys they migrate down to Mexico, which is in the transvolcanic mountains in Mexico. And there are 11 to 14 roosting sites down there. And they are concentrated all together. With this, unfortunately, the ejidatarios, which are the farmers that live down in Mexico, they do farm these trees. And they go into logging. But unfortunately for the monarchs, that is one of their only ways of making a living. That is how they make a living, is logging these trees. They're very tall, they're very straight, they make great lumber. So that is what they farm, which unfortunately is the roosting habitat for monarchs. So when they log these trees, picture having a winter coat on, and it's really, really cold. You're outside, you're in your winter coat, it's keeping you warm, but then all of a sudden you notice you feel a little cold, and it's because there's a hole in your winter coat, and that cold air is getting in. That's when you usually go inside. Well, with these monarchs, when they log the trees, it's kind of like punching a hole in their winter coat, and it sends the cold air in. So they don't typically survive all that well. Well, Mexico is protecting a lot of their forests, and they know this is where they roost, this is where the monarchs roost, so they are protecting a lot of their forests. Also, the government is trying to come up with different ways to boost the economy other than logging. So they have suggested bringing in fish farming, honey production, even shiitake mushroom cultivation. There are different ways that they are trying to get them to make a living so they can survive as farmers without taking down the habitat of the monarchs. So this is the annual life cycle of a monarch. As you can see in March, that is when the spring migration begins, and that is when the breeding season begins for these monarchs. And by April and May is still in their first generation. So that is when they're just migrating up north from Mexico. So their first generation may be in Texas or some of the southern states close to Mexico. They're going to lay their eggs down there. Then the first generation will then lay their eggs in the north. So they're going to fly a little farther north maybe Missouri latitude, lay more eggs there. And then they're gonna go again. They're gonna migrate even farther north. At this point, they'd be hitting our area, Minnesota, even southern Canada. This is your third generation of monarchs at this point. So we already have their great grandparents are from Mexico. So these guys have obviously never been to Mexico. So then they are also laying their eggs in the north, and this is happening around July-ish. All right, so then August comes around, and these guys, the ones that hatch from the July generation, they are your fourth generation monarchs, so their great-grandparents are from Mexico. And these are the ones that are, when they hatch in August, they're the ones that are going to be flying back south to Mexico. So these guys have never been to Mexico before. They've never been to the Oyamel Fir trees. They've never been to the transvolcanic mountains down in Mexico. So they have no idea where they're going. And yet, innately, they do. They know exactly where they're going. So starting around our area is about mid-September. Usually around August is the butterflies up in Canada. They're starting their migration south. In our area, it's about mid-September. Southern states, so in Oklahoma, Texas, they're starting their migration in October. And then finally, by November, they should be hitting Mexico, and they'll be down there from December through February, in which we start all over again, and we head back up north. So this is incredible that these monarchs can make this journey all the way down to Mexico, and they've never been there before, and they know exactly where to go. So with the monarch migration, you can see that the overwintering range is down in Mexico. They migrate north, lay their eggs, then they migrate north again. This is the summer breeding range. They lay their eggs, and then finally these guys are the ones that come back down south to Mexico again. So this is a picture of the US, and this kind of shows where all of our monarchs go. So you can see most of them, most overwinter in Mexico. There are a few, as you can see with the blue color. They also overwinter down in the southern tip of Florida and also on the west coast of California. So with these, the majority of them come up to the Corn Belt area, and you can see that is circled in a dotted line. And that is where a lot of the monarchs are during the summer months. Eventually come fall, like I said, they're going to migrate down south through Oklahoma, Texas. They usually follow the Interstate 35 corridor. So you can see that starts up in Minnesota, cuts right through the middle of Iowa, barely hits the tip of Missouri, and then it hits Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas before it goes down into Mexico. So that is typically the line that they follow when they are going to migrate. There are a few along the east coast of the U.S. Those may go all the way down to Mexico, or they may take a shortcut and overwinter in Florida. The Rocky Mountains kind of divides the western from the eastern monarchs. There is no monarchs that live in the Rocky Mountains, so there is a barrier there. Now, with that, there are a few, there's a question mark there. We're not sure if the monarchs in California do go down to Mexico and come back up to California, or if they just stay in California and overwinter on the west coast of California. So those are your pathways to the monarchs. So with the population, as I said earlier, it has decreased. We had actually a really good year between the summer of 18 and 19, but then the winter of 18 and 19, but the winter of 1920, we decreased again. So to put this chart in perspective, you are seeing this is how many hectares of monarchs. So how they guess the number, or estimate the number of monarchs is they do a flyover over the trees, and they take pictures of the trees, and the ones that are bright rust orange color, they know those are the ones that have the monarchs. And they circle the area, and they figure out how many hectares are there. And then they have estimated that approximately 50 million butterflies are in 1 hectare. So when you calculate this out, you can see that right now, for last winter, we went down to 2.83 hectares, which equates to about 141,500,000 butterflies, which still seems like a lot, but it's really not, considering if you look in the winter of 96-97, there was 18.19 hectares of monarchs. That is a lot of monarchs, and that is where we want our population to be. However, that was the highest it's been. It's kind of an odd year. As you can see, they haven't really hit above 12 since then. But they have decreased, and then we really started to notice the dip in the winter of 13-14. That is when we hit all the way down to 0.67 hectares. So the monarchs are really struggling that winter, and that is when we started doing all of these research projects and trying to really boost the monarch butterfly. And we have done an okay job. You can see it went up to 4.01 hectares in 15-16. Again, like I said, last winter or the previous winter, it was 6.05, and that is about the steady line. We want it to be above 6 hectares for them to have a good population, for us to not have to worry about them. But then, as you can see, last winter, it dropped again. Now, some of these reasons, it did drop in the winter of 17-18. That is when, right about March, when these guys were migrating back north, there was a huge winter storm down in Mexico. It knocked over trees. They were starting to uncluster themselves and start flying north, and then they were hit with this cold front, and that really hurt the monarch population. However, we did raise that back up, but we are back down again for this last winter. Now, the reason they are thinking, because this last winter they were doing some research on weather, on the weather trends that were happening last year before, like during their migration, before they got down there. And what they have found out is they had actually a slow year to come up north in 2019. And as you can remember, in 2019, we had a lot of flooding, and we also had some cooler temperatures. So they weren't coming up north. So they had a late migration north, and that just started their whole population late. So then, as they were coming back down, as you remember last year, we also had a huge drought in the fall. And that drought really does affect them, because they need the plants, they need the nectar from the flowering plants to build their energy reserves so they can continue flying south to Mexico. And with the drought happening, there wasn't a lot of blooms, and therefore they couldn't boost their energy reserves so they could make their way down to Mexico. So that also hurt their population. So they had a double whammy against them last year of having a late migration north, and then they had all the flooding, and then we had a huge drought, especially in Texas and Oklahoma, and those are the states that really help them with the nectar, because they need to get that last push. They need to get that last meal before making their way down to Mexico. So they had that huge drought. They didn't have the flowering plants, and that also really hurt their population. So that's where we're at this year. With that, this is how you see the doom and gloom. So here is how you can make a difference. We can really help these butterflies. Biggest thing you can do is create habitat. So if you have a big backyard, plant some flowers, get some milkweed in there, get some flowering plants, make sure they're blooming year round. Try to get some garden planted so they can have the habitat. If you live in an apartment and you don't really have a big yard, a potted plant works great. If you just want to have a little bit of nectar, that really does help them. They can stop to fuel up. Or if you're still at this apartment complex and you have the grounds of the apartment complex, maybe talk to your landlord, see if you can get some flower gardens blooming. So there's so many ways you can help. Educate others. If you plant a nice little garden in your backyard, maybe talk to your neighbors, see if they will get some gardens planted in their backyard. You can contribute data to a citizen science program, like for instance, Monarch Watch and Monarch Health, which we'll be talking about shortly. And you can advocate for the protection of wild spaces. So the National Wildlife Federation has a certified wildlife habitat program that you can get involved with. Monarch Way Stations comes through Monarch Watch, and you can certify your garden as a Monarch Way Station. So there's different things you can do to protect the wild spaces that these monarchs need to survive as a population. So as I said earlier, creating your own habitat. So to make a butterfly garden, I kind of added a personal touch in here. This is a garden in my very own personal backyard at home. And I have different ways of incorporating the monarchs. So I keep it blooming, which means make sure something is blooming from first in April all the way through October. You want something blooming. Now, there's not a lot of plants that will actually physically bloom from April through October, so you need to plant a little different variety of plants. So in my garden alone, I have creeping phlox in the garden, and these are older pictures. So right now I also have wild violets, which are one of the first things to bloom in April. So we have creeping phlox, wild violets. Then I also have the orange plant in the middle. That is butterfly milkweed. So there is my milkweed for the monarchs. I have a pink flower, which on the picture on the left is echinacea, also known as coneflower. On the picture on the right, that is monarda, which is also a very good nectar plant for bees. Then I also have asters, and the asters on the left picture are in the right side of it, the little shrubby bush looking flower. That is actually an aster, and they bloom in fall. So they're actually just now starting to bloom right now in September, and they will bloom typically through into October. So I have the early blooming plants, which aren't blooming in these pictures. I have the summer blooming plants, which you can see is the coneflower and the butterfly milkweed. I have the fall blooming plants, which is the aster, again, not blooming in this picture. So I make sure to cover all my grounds. I've also, like I said earlier, plant milkweed. I picked butterfly milkweed for my garden, but in my yard over the years, a common milkweed has started to grow in another one of my gardens. And I didn't even plant it. It planted itself and I left it. I love common milkweed. So we have common milkweed. You can also do swamp milkweed if you have a more moist ground and it's not that dry. Swamp also works in clay soils. Then there's butterfly milkweed. Those are the three most common. You can also have a world milkweed. That is another one that you can plant that is in our area. And you want to plant in clusters. They are attracted to splashes of color. So instead of putting orange all on one side and purple all on another side, try to put splashes of color throughout your garden. And then you want to plant both host and nectar plants. With the nectar plants, hopefully my slide decided to not work. All right, so host and nectar plants. As you can see, some host plants are your asters, like I have milkweed is a great one, native grasses, there's violets, black-eyed Susans, sunflowers. There's so many different host plants you can do. Then you have the nectar plants. So with the nectar plants, those are the ones that help the monarchs that are migrating. The host plants are the ones that help the caterpillar stage. Nectar plants are the ones that help the butterfly stage. So as you can see, we have for nectar plants right now, the ones that are blooming would be your asters. Goldenrod is one that is blooming right now. For the most part, the rest of them are summer plants on this one. Lantana are actually blooming right now as well, so that is another good one. Joe Pyeweed just finished blooming. Zinnias will bloom through the fall. The rest of them are more summer or spring plants. So here is a quote from Chip Taylor. He is a director of Monarch Watch. Monarch butterfly populations are declining due to loss of habitat. To assure a future for monarchs, conservation and restoration of milkweeds needs to become a national priority. That has to happen for our monarchs to survive. So one way, here's a fun little activity I just kind of threw in the middle of this presentation that you guys can do at home. You can make seed bombs. So it is made with a half cup of clay, half cup of compost, half cup of water, and then some seeds. So you mix the first three ingredients, make a nice little ball, maybe smaller than a golf ball. You can pinch a little divot in the middle, put some seeds in there, close it up, and then you can just throw it wherever. Make sure you give it 24 hours for them to dry before you throw them. And then the best way or the best time to plant a lot of seeds or even throw these seed balls out there is fall, because most seeds need a winter or a cold snap to germinate to produce plants in the spring. So if you decide to not throw them in the fall, that is fine. They won't go through that winter cold snap. But then make sure you put them in the freezer for a month or two before you put them outside, so they still get that cold snap of temperatures. We also are going to now talk about our citizen science projects. So Monarch Watch, Monarch Health, and Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, just because that one does take a little more training than the other two. You actually have to take an online course and train and get certified for that project. And that one's only from May through August. Monarch Watch and Monarch Health are happening. Monarch Health actually happens throughout the summer and goes through the fall, whereas Monarch Watch is basically you're tagging the butterflies, the ones that are migrating south. So that one is strictly in the fall. So with Monarch Watch, it was created by the University of Kansas in 1992, and it is ongoing every year from September through October every year. The volunteers capture the adult butterflies via a butterfly net, and they tag them on the underside of their lower wing, and then they record the date, the location, gender, and tag number on a data sheet. And that can all be found at monarchwatch.org. Now, these little tags I'll show you in some pictures later, they are tiny. They're about the size of a hole punch. So the purpose of tagging is to associate the location of capture with the location of recovery down in Mexico. And this will tell people, or tell the scientists, their pathway they took, so they'll know exactly, hey, they were tagged in Iowa, they ended up in El Rio, Mexico, or they were tagged up in Minnesota, they were recaptured again in Kansas, now they're found down in Mexico. So it shows them all about their monarch pathways. It also shows them the influence of weather on the migration. So they can go back through the weather data and see what happened, what storms are coming through, were we in a drought, were we in a flood, and they can see how that influences their migration. And then it also shows you the survival rate of the monarchs. So how many were tagged versus how many actually made it down to Mexico. So as you can see, here is a butterfly that I tagged in the pictures, and you can see my thumb right there. That is about the size of a hole punch. So these tags, they each have a unique series of letters and numbers, and every year they're different. If you order a bunch of tags this year, you cannot use those tags next year. You have to reorder next year. These tags are 3M adhesive, so they stick really well, but they're light enough where they don't harm the butterfly and they don't weight the butterfly down, so it can still migrate down to Mexico. The Monarch Watch begins distributing the tags first thing in August. We got ours about mid-August because that is when our migration starts around here. And you can purchase these tags in increments of 25 all the way up to 500 tags. And then at the end of the year, as you're collecting the data, you will send in that data sheet. Right now, they're having you send it in online. You can also send it in via mail. And then you'll let the scientists do all the data analyzing. So here I show you, we have had 3 tags recovered since we started this program back in 2015. So we had 2 tags recovered in 2015, both in El Rio, Mexico. One was recovered on February of 2016. Actually, I think they both were recovered on that day, but they were both tags here in Dixon, Iowa. One was tagged in August and one was tagged in September. Then we skipped a couple seasons because none of our butterflies were found, but for the 17-18 winter, we tagged one on September in 2017, and it was recovered in Mexico in March of 2018. So 3 of our butterflies we know for a fact have made it from Iowa all the way down to Mexico. And that's really exciting for us to find out. So Project Monarch Health, that is the other citizen science project we're going to talk about. And this one studies more of the parasite of the monarch. So the Odom School of Ecology at the University of Georgia developed this project in 2006, and it has been ongoing every year from April through October. Volunteers survey the occurrence of Ophiocystis electroscura, which from now on I am going to say OE because that is much easier to say. And this is a protozoan parasite that harms monarch butterflies. You can find more information on this at monarchparasites.org, but I will go into a little more detail on OE. So here is the life cycle of the monarch butterfly with the life cycle, which is the inner circle of OE. So as you can see, as an adult butterfly, it has the spores already on them for the OE. It lays its eggs, and when it lays its eggs, the spores fall onto the egg itself of the OE. Then when the egg hatches, the little caterpillar will start munching away at its egg, and it will end up eating those spores of the OE. So now this parasite is internal. It is now inside the caterpillar. So then as the caterpillar continues eating that leaf that the egg was laid on, there are also spores on that leaf, and it's going to continue eating the spores of that OE. And you can see with the inner circle of the OE, you can see that it was a little egg sac of the spores. It opened up the same time the caterpillar hatched, the same time the caterpillar is eating. It then goes into the J formation, and these spores inside the caterpillar, they're now internal, are developing and they're multiplying and they're making its way through the caterpillar body. Then as the caterpillar is in the chrysalis stage for those 10 to 14 days, that is when these spores continue to grow and multiply. By the time the chrysalis turns black, which means it's ready to hatch, the butterfly will hatch, and again, now these spores are on the outside of the butterfly, and again, that cycle starts all over again when they start laying eggs. So the cycle of the OE is in sync with the cycle of the butterfly, which is why it is prevalent. So here are some data. I have 2016, 2017, and 2018 data. We don't quite have 2019 data yet, just because around the time they usually analyze the data is when their lab shut down in March down in Georgia, and so they're starting to get back into the lab and starting to analyze that data. They just haven't gotten there yet. But for 2016 data, you can see the Midwest, we only have 2.4% of our population was infected in the Midwest. But then you look at South Florida, you look at the Pacific coast, you look at the Gulf and Atlantic coast, that's where you hit 43%, 61%, 76% of their population is infected. So if you look at the 2017 data, it kind of shows you why. So if you look in the Midwest area, which is right above the Great Lakes, there is a blue dot with a little red. Blue means they are healthy butterflies. Red means they are infected. And you can see it's only 5.5% of the butterflies in our area are infected. But then you look at Florida, you look at Texas, you look at California, and they have anywhere from 56% is infected to 67% is infected. So they have a lot. And if you think about it, it is because they don't get the harsh winters in Florida, Texas, and the southern coast of California. So their milkweed survives. It doesn't ever die off. They don't get that harsh freeze that we get up north, and therefore the OE continues to grow, continues to populate, and continues to infect our butterflies. But then you see down in Mexico, you go even farther south, and there is only 2.2% of the butterflies down there are infected. Reason being, this OE, this parasite, makes them very weak, and typically they do not even make it down to Mexico. So those that do are not infected, or if they are, they were just lucky enough to make it there, but not a lot of the infected ones make it down to Mexico. However, when they fly back up north, they got to pass through Texas and the southern states to come back up north, in which they are now reinfected because those plants may still have the OE spores on them. And then they make it back up here, and that's how very little, but it still does, the OE still makes it back up here. So as you can see, that is 2016, 2017 data. Here is 2018 data. So the data is it's going to be a little different for the 2019 data, which, like I said, has not quite been analyzed or thrown out to the public yet, but they did get the numbers of how many people have participated. So in 2018, there were 213 volunteers for Monarch Health, in which they collected 11,800 samples of OE data to send into the lab for them to analyze. And this is the chart you're seeing from those 11,800 samples. But this year we had fewer volunteers. We only had 135 volunteers, and we only turned in 6,860 samples. So it's going to be a smaller data set, which means it may not look exactly like this. But as you can see, With the western coast of California and down in Florida, you can see there are a lot of dark red and a lot of black spots. And those are the heavily infected area where 75 to 100% are the black dots. Whereas the lighter amounts are up kind of sporadic throughout the Midwest and the Northeast. And then on California coast, again, there is a lot of infection going on out there. And you can see with the blocks at the bottom, we have the green, red, and blue. Green shows your California coast. Red shows your southern, so Texas and Florida. And then blue shows your Midwest, Northeast. So you can see our numbers are relatively low in our area, which is good, but it is still a parasite we need to worry about and study. So from Project Monarch Health, you can see the little note card at the bottom. Those are our samples. And basically what you do is you capture a wild monarch, or if you are rearing monarchs, you can capture those once they have hatched. And you take a clear sticker and you press it against the abdomen of the butterfly, and that collects the parasite spores, or just in general, basically like the skin cells of the butterfly. And this does not hurt them at all. It's kind of like with us with our skin cells. They fall off every day, just like they do with monarch butterflies. So it doesn't hurt them at all. And then you put it on a white note card. Those are the ones we send into the lab down in Georgia, and they look at them down there. They analyze the data. They send the data back up to us. And this helps us achieve a better understanding of the host-parasite relationship or the interactions in the monarch butterflies. So as you can see here, this is me in the field doing this project. So I have gloves on because I don't want, if this butterfly is in fact infected, I don't want to pass it on. I try to either clean the gloves or change the gloves between butterflies. I'm holding the butterfly very delicately by the wings. I am not rubbing my fingers together because when you do that, you can ruin their wings. So I'm just lightly pinching them. I press that little sticker against the abdomen, as you can see in the top right. Then as you can see in the bottom left, I have a permanent marker and I put a very tiny dot on the wing, and that tells me, or that tells other researchers, if they collect this butterfly later, they will see that dot on the wing and they'll know it's already been tested and they don't need to test it again. Then I record all that data, and then you can see in the bottom right, I have a tag on that one. So we also tagged this butterfly before we released it. So some organizations that you can get involved with that support monarch butterflies, there is a Monarch Butterfly Fund, there is a National Wildlife Federation, there is a Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, the Northern American Butterfly Association, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And these are just 5 of them. There are a lot of organizations out there that support the monarch butterfly. So if you're wondering, well, where do I get milkweed? I want to start a garden. I want to get milkweed growing in my yard. I like to stick to our local garden or local greenhouses. So I have seen milkweed at Teskey's, Wallace's, and Green Thumbers. I've seen it at all 3. So that is the local stores where you can get milkweed to start planting your very own garden. So thank you so much for tuning in today and learning all about the monarch butterfly. As you can see in my pictures, that is how they form their J into a chrysalis and hatch into a beautiful butterfly. Again, my name is Becky. I am a naturalist here at the Wapsie River Center. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. There is my email on there. It's rebecca.ball@scottcountyiowa.gov. The phone number to the center is 563-328-3286. So feel free to call. Any of us naturalists can answer the questions for you for the monarchs. And then I'll leave you with my favorite quote. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. So that is one of my favorite quotes. So I, again, want to thank you guys for joining me today to learn all about the monarch butterflies. Feel free to contact us. Come find us out at the Wapsie Center. Please check out our nature center. If you have any questions, or if you don't, still check us out. We're a pretty cool center. So thank you again. I hope to see you soon.